popcorn?
Uh-huh.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some...
Video about Scream.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Scream.
No, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks.
Sidney Prescott.
Yeah.
What's yours?
Guess.
Also Scream.
Is that the one where the guy had...
A big knife.
Yeah.
Ghostface.
That's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So, you got a boyfriend?
For a long time, I straight up refused to watch horror movies. I think the last one I saw in theaters prior to Midsummer in 2019 was Disturbia in 2008. Another favorite now that I'm thinking about it. Video forthcoming on a rewatch. Probably. Maybe. Anyway, I made a decision sometime around 2016 to change all that, and now I've been binging horror movies for 20 days straight, according to my own tweets. Scream 1 through 5, twice each except for 3, even more in the case of the first, Hellraiser, Halloween, Friday the 13th, MTV's Scream, A Nightmare on Elm Street, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, The Thing. Shouts out to David, Josue, and Sean. This is all ahead of my usual October schedule too. Alien, The Blair Witch Project, It Follows, Hereditary, Scream Again. I'm stoked for it. As a relative newcomer to horror, there exists a comfort that starts to seep in to accompany the dread as you lean further and further in. The subdivisions and tectonics of structure and genre start to light up at the base of every suburban middle-class home, shatter mirrors in high school bathrooms, and sprout up through every portal to hell opened in the woods, under the lake, at the mall. You get the point. Over time, there's a level of intimacy established between the genre's form and the audience's function. It's a critical process, and it's in some ways deterministic for the genre as a whole. These movies tend to react to their audience as much as their audience reacts to them, and it's often this push and pull in the genre that leads to its evolution. The 80s really saw this trend come into its own, owed equally to people like John Carpenter, Wes Craven, Tobe Hooper, Amy Holden-Jones, and many others. The introduction of Carpenter's Halloween into the horror movie lexicon codified many of the hallmarks of the burgeoning slasher subgenre, introduced in movies like Hitchcock's Psycho, Craven's The Last House on the Left, and the rise of the Italian slasher genre that inspired them in turn. The elements had all been there previously. Deranged and unmotivated killers, innocent families in the wrong place at the wrong time, and most importantly, the sole survivor of the night's events, the final girl. In 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween took these looser, though fully intentional elements and sewed them together into a template, and it proved to be a foundational text for not just slashers, but nearly all the horror genre moving forward. It's the rulebook. These movies tend to react to each other, too. It's this insular reaction to genre that also helps define it, at least as much as any given movie within, and not always for the better. That, among other factors innate to, but not overtly commodified by horror, is how you end up with movies like Jason X, Freddy's Dead, and Hellraiser Bloodlines. Sequelitis run rampant, extravagantly staged kills to sleep and study to, camp that's not camp because it lacks self-awareness, all running each franchise and the genre as a whole into the dirt. In the aftermath, somebody asked Kevin Williamson what you do once you're there. Then he asked Wes Craven. The answer is that you revel in it, and together, they made Scream.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance,
Rule number 1, writing the rules. I meant it when I said Halloween established a template. There are rules to this. Rule 1, no sex. Boo. Rule 2, no drugs or drinking. It's the sin factor. Also boo. Rule 3, never say, I'll be right back. I like that one. This is the shape of horror circa 1996, and while alluded to in movies like 93's Evil Toons and Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 94, it was a sentiment expressly reserved for theater chatter, growing louder with every passing sequel. It was only a matter of time before form caught up to function in the shape of Kevin Williamson's script, no pun intended. Scream understands the rules. There's endless praise to be found concerning the first 30 pages of Williamson's script. It's the foundation of the horror formula, sorry Sean, and its rules set to task on a tour de force through the first 13 minutes of the movie. Randy's rule rundown isn't an explanation, it's a confirmation. Williamson's precedent setting is obvious here. The opening of Scream is a literal masterpiece of distilled horror, and that it plays so expertly to the rest of the movie's meta-narrative conceit is most of why it's so intensely memorable, as well as why it's usually the first thing to get discussed when folks bring the movie up. It's an example in screenwriting. There is no wasted space, only time, tools, and execution. Every writing decision is an answer to a question, and it's usually the case that each of these answers come with their own set of additional questions. You run through each until the tentpoles are established, and the additional questions become irrelevant or subject to conclusion. The real trick is learning how to ask the right questions. For Craven and Williamson, it's a matter of following the audience's eyeline to the valleys between script and screen and searching there for justification. Why is Casey making popcorn? It helps us keep track of the time. It exacerbates and mirrors rising tension. It makes the setting more dynamic while raising the stakes. It gives the characters something to talk about. Why is Casey Becker making popcorn? Well, just like the theater watching her, she's getting ready to watch a scary movie. The only question left to answer is, what's her favorite? The line, "What's your favorite scary movie?" is quintessential and iconic here. It tells the audience everything they need to know, and Casey's answer, Halloween, is equally important to them as it is to Williamson. The opening of Scream, like most great openings, crafts its own 3-act structure in miniature. It's a well-worn writing practice in nearly all modalities, but the benefit of the medium is that the script is able to stack the gains of this structure in more visceral ways. It's the closest a movie can get to being interactive, and the virtue of name-dropping Halloween is that the script gets to become anticipatory. It's a perfect recipe for a theater full of people ready to yell at the screen, and Williamson's going to put it to the test. Casey threatens to call the police, but she's in the middle of nowhere. No dice. She calls out, "Who's there?" to a mysterious knock. Any horror fan should know better than that. Her boyfriend's going to show up and kick the shit out of him. Poor Steve. She and the killer both get to be wrong about Friday the 13th. Jason shows up at the end of the original, not the sequel. It's arguably the most famous moment in the movie. My headcanon is that her killer's also an idiot teenager, so it makes sense that they're both wrong because I'm smarter than teenagers. Oh well, poor Steve again. Then you hit the third act. Casey grabs a knife and gets outside. The killer finds her and gets in the kill. Cut to the hope spot with Mom and Dad, but it's too late. Who have we got and what are they missing? Mom, Dad, and the audience all need their resolution. How do we get it to them? Chekhov's phone. Mom and Dad hear Casey breathing, run outside, and discover her body. End scene. Cut from Barrymore to Campbell. Remember Marion Crane, Annie Brackett, Tina Gray? You'll remember Casey Becker too. It's the rules. Rule number 2. Following the rules. I conducted a survey asking what's the hardest part of writing across 127 members of my captive teenage audience at work. They told me that the hardest part of writing is getting started. I told them they're right, because I spent a month and a half trying to write the intro to this video. Whenever I walked around and saw rows of empty papers, the answer to whatever question I had was usually, I don't know what to write. The solution, I told them, is to get any words they can onto the page and move on from there. Then, I immediately assigned them an essay telling me about the 3 most essential ideas in the Declaration of Independence.
This is how I win.
Scream's a really big deal for Kevin Williamson. It's how he got his start. You can tell he likes telling the story by hearing how he tells it. I like hearing it. The adage, write what you know, grants folks a wider berth than they're usually accustomed to. It beckons the question, what do I know? The fun part is that you get to answer. After all I've had to say about the opening of Scream, the final word that comes to mind is deliberate, and the shadow of that umbrella covers the entire script. The opening of Scream is Williamson's 30-page dissertation on what do I know about horror brought to life. What's left in its wake is, how can I use it? The script's informed by what it knows about horror, but it's not beholden to it. It recognizes opportunities to expand, and Williamson starts by applying his knowledge to areas horror films are often lacking. In this case, character. Sidney Prescott hears a noise from the window and boyfriend Billy grabs her arm to pull himself in. And what follows is the first scene where Williamson shows us how he'll be using the convention set up in the opening to expand a bit. Set up Dad interrupting to give an early alibi, set up the door jamming for later, and now Billy wants to talk about their intimacy issues. It's telling that the first break with convention Williamson explores isn't in broad structure or genre tropes, but by addressing a legitimate grievance with horror, that these employments are used to inform character rather than the other way around. A great conceit for a 13-minute short film does not a movie make, but it does serve as an appropriate vehicle for all kinds of cargo. Williamson loads it here with Billy's talk of horror movies being edited for TV, like his and Sydney's relationship. They go back and forth trading movie metaphors before they decide to make out about it. It's actually a really romantic scene, highlighted by the gorgeous rendition of Don't Fear the Reaper playing underneath, itself a shout out to the template first established by Halloween. It goes a long way in establishing an early depth to these characters. It's tender and well cared for. There's also tension here, both innate and recursive. Sydney's room is kind of a fortress, with its closet drawbridge and overlook of the scenic California landscape, but Billy has access to all of it. He shows up unannounced and presses Sydney for access to her directly. He leaves space for plausible deniability, posturing in conversation but dictating with action. The catch is that Sydney's open to it, to a degree. The door's still open, even if it's blocked somewhat by the closet. It's some on top of the closed stuff. We find out later the specific reasons why Sydney's closed off in this way, but that fact is again more akin to confirmation than revelation. The guts of what the audience needs is developed right here. Craven casts a lingering eye on the moment before we move forward, but we're more than doubling up on establishing character from here, so it's a good opportunity to get a little bit crafty with our screen time. Utilizing the rules of the genre isn't an exclusive benefit to screenwriting, and who better to manipulate those rules to the benefit of the script than the person who keeps reinventing them? Wes Craven's meteoric imprint on the genre is empirically undeniable. 3 classics across 2 decades at bare minimum. Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, A Nightmare on Elm Street. And that he's a screenwriter himself only serves as further connective tissue to the vision of this script. Craven's been here before. He knows the beats. Cue Sydney's disdainful gaze toward Gale Weathers in her garish highlighter suit as she covers yet another scandalous story. Cue Tatum Riley, literal angel of my dreams, coloring the tone and setting expectations as she delivers the news of Casey and Steve's deaths while alluding to Sydney's on-edge reaction. How do we know that we should be taking this any more seriously than Tatum is? Cue Sydney's broken gaze at Casey's seat next to her, and now we're outside with the principal cast, and the distillery of script, direction, and casting comes together fully to present its case to the audience. Billy, Stu, Tatum, and Randy are all outside with Sydney discussing the murders after she gets questioned by the Fonz. Inspired casting. This kind of scene is pretty by the numbers across most scripts. It's basic characterization by way of exposition. What's noteworthy here is all contextual. The movie knows it's being watched.
The director's answering questions in the cafeteria, and it both is and isn't part of the movie. Get a table!
They're working through the case and establishing motives and alibis. Stu isn't taking things seriously. Randy's pulling an Abed. Tatum is incredulous. Billy's trying to control the conversation, and Sydney's observing distantly. Broad strokes are usually criticized as a mode of character creation, but they're a tool as useful as any other, especially so here. They're operating as shorthand in lieu of a deeper exploration since the movie is operating on limited time and hasn't finished introducing the bodies yet. Obnoxious journalist, goofy cop, brooding boyfriend, damaged girl, spunky girl, big idiot. You distinguish them in the performance. Craven sources these 3 factors to craft fully realized characters, heightening the tension for the audience whenever they try to outpace the movie. These are still bodies, it's just going to hit harder once they stop moving, and it's going to hit harder than that when we find out why. Speaking of bodies dropping, this is a horror movie, and a killer needs to kill, or at least try to. Rule number 3, bending the rules. If I see a movie poster, how do I peg that movie for a slasher as opposed to a different kind of horror, like Poltergeist, or Hostel, or The Witch? It's in the iconography. Leatherface, Michael Myers, the Xenomorph, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Pinhead, and Ghostface. They're all treated like emblems by their respective franchises. That's half of what makes their movies franchisable in the first place, and why they're so sequel-prone. Their success and the pop culture tidal wave brought on by their image, regardless of season, is why series like The Conjuring branch out into movies like Annabelle and The Nun. This is something that Craven understood since the very first Nightmare. Your villain has to define your series. It's also because of this insight that Freddy and Ghostface get to chat it up, while others like Myers and Voorhees remain silent. Usually, it's the case that the audience will follow the villain through the series. They're the main draw. But every now and then, these movies featured a final girl who could make an impact. Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode, alongside Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson, are probably the best examples of this prior to Scream. But even then, they were both ousted from the sequels before eventually being brought back into the fold. The real draw was always seeing how Freddy's going to manipulate the dream world next time, or how Michael would come back to life after being blown to smithereens, or how Jason would kill the next batch of horny counselors. Ghostface and Sidney Prescott get to turn this on its head. Ghostface has always been an interesting icon for the series because the representations of him in marketing, merchandise, and general iconography all forgo the fact that he's not always the same person. He changes from movie to movie. He can come in a set or be on his own. He can have a motive or be totally unhinged. And he can be anybody from a tiny teenage girl to a strange Hollywood director man-baby. What's interesting about this is that it distills the qualities of a slasher movie villain to their essentials: a mask, a weapon, and a gimmick. For Ghostface, we've got our phone world mask, a hunting knife, the phone calls he makes, and his voice. These are the elements the movie runs with to have its cake and eat it too. Ghostface is treated fundamentally as his own character, and he's being played, so to speak, by whoever puts on the mask at the time. There's a delicate nature to straddling the line between acceptable breaks from reality and denouncing inconsistencies between different Ghostfacers as arbitrary. The audience needs to be able to put the suspects behind the mask, at least to an extent, which is where the commonizing elements of each portrayal come in. Enter Roger L. Jackson. Jackson is the closest thing the audience gets to a consistent Ghostface, providing the voice on the other side of the phone line, or at least one of the voices on the other side. Scream 3 gets a little weird. Regardless, it's his voice, cadence, tonality, and presence which represent Ghostface as an entity larger than those wearing the costume. Jackson's sarcastic, depraved, and often hammy delivery leaves a perfect impression. I think my absolute favorite line delivery in the entire series is the satisfied
Yeah.
after he tells Casey he'll gut her like a fish. A perfect summation of character and tone. Up there with Harry Osborn's
So good.
in Spoodermensch 3. As far as kills go, Ghostface is alright. He isn't especially creative, and he's definitely not that scary. Once again, he's treated more like a classic slasher villain in the meta of the series. Unkillable, unstoppable, somewhat superhuman. As opposed to how he appears in the movies proper, where he's goofy, clumsy, fallible, still deadly, but most importantly, human. The first time we get to see this play out is with Sidney after school, and it's the first time the audience gets to see how the two of them interact. These interactions will go on to define the series, and the phone calls in Scream are the defining aspect of their horror. Sidney wakes up with a call from Tatum telling her that she's on the way. She sets down the phone, and it rings again.
Hello, Sydney.
The killer starts asking about scary movies again, and Sid smartly figures it must be Randy. I can't believe I'm this far into the script, and I haven't mentioned the words Neve Campbell yet. Jesus Christ. These are the first moments we really get to see Sidney on her own, and how she operates in conflict. Sidney Prescott doesn't watch horror movies, but she knows how they work, and when the killer says,
Maybe that's because I'm not Randy.
it's Campbell's performance that guides the audience to the places the script can't. She's taken aback, but undeterred. She's a little nervous. She's also pissed. Neve Campbell illustrates all of this flawlessly in 7 seconds, using nothing but her face. We're establishing character, providing a red herring, and now it's time to bend some rules. Where Casey hangs up and locks the door, Sidney keeps talking and steps outside. She calls the killer's bluff and defaults back to assuming Randy, and then the killer drops a bomb.
If you hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother.
Now, Sid knows it's real. Kevin Williamson backs Sidney into a corner here. You can't bend the rules if there's no movie, so he, takes away her bending. This isn't some horror movie, it's her life. Neve Campbell gets that, and that's part of what makes Sidney so strong. It's also the strength that lets Sidney survive the ensuing encounter. She locks the door and is forced upstairs. It's a desperate struggle. She clambers into her bedroom and secures it using the same door jam method the movie shows earlier, while the killer flings wildly at her. He disappears while Sidney contacts the police, and just as suddenly, Billy appears in the window. Sidney moves into his arms, and he drops a cell phone. For all we've seen of Billy, any suspicions roused by him earlier are confirmed here. Rule 3.5, it's always the boyfriend. Rule number 4, breaking the rules. Williamson confirming the audience's priors here goes a long way in setting up the rest of the movie, and bending the rules in other ways. As we enter Act 2, the setup and revelation around Sidney's mom gives us opportunities to explore everything else, now that some of the pieces fit. Sidney gets her bending back and uses it to punch Gale Weathers in the face. She doesn't have to be nice. The rules seem to crack in front of the audience once Sidney gets another call while Billy's in jail, exonerating him. A fact that the killer uses to taunt her. Part of Scream's unique identity, running in direct parallel with its specific commentary on horror, is how the audience gets to see how the wider world reacts to the Woodsboro murders. In Halloween, it's a town hiding a dark secret. In Friday the 13th, it's an urban legend. In Nightmare, nobody believes the kids. In Scream, everybody knows. And it's here that it starts to break the rules entirely. The public knowledge of the events in the movie not only dictate the direction of the plot, it lets the characters chime in as well. Randy Meeks is about as close to an audience surrogate as an audience can get, and his ability to lean on the fourth wall allots Williamson a mouthpiece to spell out the metatext directly.
If you were the only suspect in a senseless bloodbath, would you be standing in the horror section?
Good question. The scene in the video store with Randy and Stu plays out like Williamson having a conversation with himself. And to the extent that writing's mostly talking to yourself anyway, he is. How is Randy able to spell out how this goes down in the horror section? He's got Stu there asking the right questions. Randy and Stu run through the gamut of options, given what they know. 2 dead, Sidney's attack, Billy dropping the phone, the call while he's in jail. So who's doing it, and what's their motive? Sidney's dad is out there somewhere, but the template says that's a red herring. Occam's razor and the target demo dictate that it's gotta be Billy. Simplicity is key. Stu used to date Casey Becker, and Randy's alibi call-out goes slickly unanswered when we first meet him. What about Randy? He's got the horror movie knowledge, an unrequited crush on Sidney, and the motive dependent on Billy. He says it himself.
You're absolutely right. I'm the first to admit it. If this were a scary movie, I'd be the prime suspect.
That the first suspect doesn't usually turn out to be the culprit is Williamson's own subtextual bait. Besides,
It's the millennium. Motives are incidental.
the script's playing hide the ball with the audience here, and the rules of the genre are a means of keeping score. The prize on both ends is the promise that they're allowed to break the rules, and the trophy is the movie. Williamson calls out all of the conventional alibis and explanations through Randy as a means of purposefully expelling them from audience expectation. And by the end of the conversation, there really isn't an obvious path forward according to the rules. Randy's best guess is still Billy. Ahead of all of this, we get Gale and Dewey starting up, a good pairing, the dangling corpse of Principal Winkler's body, and the facts are laid out just in time for the big finale, a party at Stu's house. This set piece is pretty infamous on a technical level. It's filmed on location, at night, and was shot across 21 days of principal photography. It's where Craven and Williamson finally get to stretch their legs, and it's a party, so the kids are going to break some rules too. It's been kind of difficult for me to break this movie structurally like I did with Scooby-Doo, and I think that's because the movie is structured more similarly to a dissertation than a typical 3-act narrative. The dividing lines aren't entirely clear between the second and third acts, at least to my eye. You generally find act breaks right after a big capstone, like Sidney's attack in the first third, but setting the rest of the movie in a single location after buzzing between Casey's house, Sidney's house, Tatum's house, the school, and the police station gives the first half of the movie a truncated feel by comparison. It makes the script operate in a way that feels more like it's presenting its own conceit, abstract, and evidence, as opposed to focusing on a more traditional narrative structure, and fittingly so. It's not a bad thing. It's also fun to find all the compelling potential act breaks sprinkled in here. The attack on Tatum, Billy's arrival, and the bedroom scene all come to mind, but ultimately, it's an arbitrary distinction. Heading into the party, Williamson gives us a quick shift in perspective. We haven't spent much time away from Sydney since her introduction beyond the video store, and that goes doubly so with regard to FaceTime with Dewey and Gale. The movie takes an opportunity here to introduce their dynamic and spend a little time. The girls leave Dewey's car, and we're left with him as he focuses on Gale. Together, they decide to go in and check it out, just in case. This moment's used to set the table. Gale gets to be intrepid and underhanded by setting up a secret live feed. Dewey gets to be irresponsible and goofy and accurate to policing by not busting the wealthy white Californian teens chugging beers at him. And soon enough, we're into the thick of it. Craven's direct influence isn't something I've touched on too much yet, but Tatum's death scene is his signature distilled. She's confronted by Ghostface in Stu's garage and they play Psycho Killer. Tatum's talking movies like the rest of the Woodsboro teens until the killer's intentions become clear. And Sydney must be rubbing off on her since she chooses to fight like a badass instead of waiting to die. It goes back to the movie's ethos of servicing the character beneath the trope. However, tropes are tools for enforcing the rules, so Tatum still has to die. There's a crash from the camp of it all once Tatum's being lifted in the garage, a Craven specialty. Watching her neck snap while her head's squished in the garage and her body dangles is a visceral come down. Craven likes this technique, and he likes showcasing the artistry on display behind the camera. You can tell because it's here in the shot of Casey's similarly mangled, hanging corpse that drew much of the MPAA's ire. His affection for lingering on good effects is also evident in that both of these shots feature intricate and superbly crafted dolls in place of their actresses. See also the bed scene in A Nightmare on Elm Street, absolutely terrifying, probably my favorite slasher kill of all time. For all of Williamson's efforts and triumphs in crafting Tatum, it's Craven's eye for brutality that makes them linger. It's good horror, just ask Randy. Where Casey's creepy call is Scream's most famous sequence, Randy's rule rundown is probably its most famous moment. It's as synonymous to the genre as the scenes it's sourcing from in real time, and we're watching Casey's favorite movie to celebrate the occasion. Billy made it to the party and is upstairs with Sydney, who's looking to apologize for suspecting him by saying fuck the MPAA. Randy's downstairs ranting about how their survivor's always a virgin.
Number one, you can never have sex.
Williamson indulges his inner Harmon long enough to lay the groundwork and cement the moment in movie history, and as soon as he's done, Gale Weathers gets to be the best member of your viewing audience.
Boring.
Then she heads off with Dewey to check on Red Herring. The real testament to the rule scene is built into the sequence it sets up. Halloween's on record as Kevin Williamson's favorite movie, and so the audience is treated to a sequence that acts as fanboy homage, historical interrogation, and reinterpretation of John Carpenter's classic. How do we introduce this concept?
Look, here comes the obligatory tit shot.
The tit for tat between Scream and Halloween continues. Jamie Lee Curtis sees a body being dragged across the street. Jamie Kennedy gets a call about a body hanging in a football field. The tit shot leads straight into postcoital murder. Then we'll have Skeet Ulrich's discretionary shoulder lead to an obfuscated postcoital attack. The killer chases Sydney out of the house and sets his sights on Randy, and everybody involved is treated to a nightmare sequence straight out of Freddy's on Dreamatorium. Craven, Williamson, and company force the audience to yell at Jamie playing Randy, who's yelling at the Jamie playing Laurie, both to look behind them as both killers lurk behind both Jamies, and realize at this point that the rules aren't just broken, they're completely shattered. The only thing left to do is... Rule number 5. Rewriting the rules. One thing I've learned about Wes Craven from poring over his interviews for hours on end over the past week is that the dude really loved to tell stories. May he rest in peace. It's been cool and insightful to learn about his time and background as an English teacher while I'm navigating my first year as one too. One of the stories about Scream he told a lot in the interviews I watched was about how he was kind of done with horror. He did New Nightmare, and he put down a tombstone to commemorate the legacy of a genre he helped create and recreate. Then he met a 12-year-old fan who told him he needed to make a kick-ass movie again, and so he did. He exhumed and stitched back together the corpse of a dead genre he helped bury, and the climax of Scream largely served as the jolt that brought it back to life. Halloween's behind us now. It's playing in the background while Dewey searches through the house, and Laurie Strode's falling down the stairs on TV. There's nobody watching her anymore. Meanwhile, Gail drives her mystery machine through a scene that reminds me of why I love scary movies so much, crashes it into the plot ditch, and everything's set as the killer steps out of the house behind Dewey, knife in back. He takes a last go at Sidney, giving me my favorite Ghostface moment of the movie, when he ducks under the car, and then Craven calls in the lineup for identification. Randy and Stu both jump out of nowhere and the tension starts to ratchet. One of them has to be the killer. Who's Sidney gonna trust? Herself. Playing the odds like this is something people only do in the movies, so fuck them both. Only one left to go, and this time, we're all watching as Billy eats it down the stairs, and then Sid hands him the gun.
Surprise, Sidney.
Scream's famous double reveal hits with a weight that's backstopped by the sheer force of will it takes to break new ground, in a genre defined by its own slavish devotion to formula.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula.
The thing about a formula is that the constant is a series of operations, but the output's still dependent on the input, and the input is any number of variables. Formulae are self-deterministic in their own kind of way. They exist insofar that the validity of a given formula is intrinsically determined by the justifications provided by its own set of proofs. A formula can only exist once it's been reverse engineered. Scream, in execution, is just adjusting the inputs on screen. It's peer review the movie. Like all good reveals, the two-killer twist recontextualizes the movie completely. It adds a perverse and sinister undertone to any given rewatch. Scenes like Billy's edited for TV talk, the fountain scene, and Randy's accusation in the video store all shift and twist beneath the surface, allowing for a bevy of new speculation, interpretation, and anticipatory dread. It's an invitation to the audience to experience horror's own version of New Game Plus. In the moment proper, Williamson uses the twist to investigate his own breadcrumb trail leading to the new rules of horror. It's the millennium. Motive is incidental. Motivation in horror is the screenwriter's own Kobayashi Maru, the unwinnable situation. On one hand, as Billy says,
See, it's a lot scarier when there's no motive, Sid.
on the other hand, one of the cardinal sins of writing is soliciting a question you don't have the answer to. An author can rely on audience projection to fill in the gaps, but the net result is that the question ultimately lingers. Such is the author's function. Williamson's lean into the postmodernist redefinitional isn't made entirely clear until the formula is reverse engineered. Why are Billy and Stu killing their friends? Billy gives his motive rant to Sidney directly, and this is a good moment to talk about Skeet Ulrich. Famously, Ulrich approached the role from the perspective of a documentary about a teenage serial killer. He was intensely focused on the why of his character, even during production. You can catch a certain grimace on Billy's face directed specifically at Stu throughout the movie, particularly when Stu isn't taking things as seriously, which is most of the time. It's hard to call it coincidental given the lessons presented here, but Ulrich's frustration with Lillard's sense of levity on set and on camera is well documented, having been recounted by both actors themselves. Happy accident or otherwise, it imbues Billy with a certain pathos that sits in stark contrast with the teen's goofier musings about horror throughout the movie, and it validates itself through his performance. He's utterly sadistic once he's got the knife to Sidney's throat. He may have fashioned his plan to fall in line with the tired rules and cliches of horror, but just like Sidney, it isn't a movie for him, it's his life. Of course Billy's the one with the motive. It makes total sense.
There's always some stupid bullshit reason to kill your girlfriend.
Billy's rationale here is that Sidney's mom fucked his dad, and that ruined his family and his life. Always some bullshit reason indeed, but Ulrich's understated derangement here goes a long way in selling the entirety of his character to those willing to buy. Even more deranged is Matthew Lillard's iconic performance as Stu Macher. I've talked about Lillard's acting instincts before, and post-reveal Stu is the perfect launchpad for him to put those instincts on full display. Stu's lack of motivation sits in direct contrast to Billy's intense obsession with Sidney. Where Billy's cold, precise, and calculating, Stu's wildly unpredictable. He's slobbering over himself, musing about horror movies and comparing them to his own pitch, and when the tides inevitably turn, he breaks down crying about how pissed his parents are going to be as he bleeds to death on his own kitchen counter. Even he can't really explain what's driving him, and then Billy hits him with the phone. The net result of Billy and Stu's positioning in the climax is that it allows the script to dance effortlessly between the horrors of knowing and the horrors of the unknown. Williamson's script reverse engineers any and all motivations it presents to invariably arrive at the abject horror of the moment. It's the millennium, and motives are incidental. Sidney's able to escape after the two reveal their plan to frame her dad and start bickering, and the movie continues to showcase the new rules of horror as they're painted directly on top of the old ones. Michael Myers is tormenting Laurie Strode hiding in the closet, while Billy corners Sid in parallel to do the same. Where audiences previously understood that the power to break through the closet by surprise is reserved for the killer, however, Williamson makes an amendment. That power isn't governed by the killer, it's awarded to the main character, and in acknowledging that the main character in these movies is usually the one in the mask, Sidney gets to wear the series' own as she crashes through the closet and lays into Billy with an umbrella. The ensuing climactic fight irons out the rest of the fine detail in establishing a new rulebook for the genre. Sidney Prescott may be the main character, but it's Gale Weathers who gets to be the final girl. Her arc here takes on the posture of Michael Myers rising in the background, narratively, as she pops up yet again to help Sidney finish the job once and for all. In the aftermath of it all, Williamson indulges himself once more through Randy and adopts a legacy rule the audience can anchor themselves to. The killer always gets back up for one last scare.
Not in my movie.
Well said. Wes Craven had a philosophy about why people go to watch horror movies. He said that people don't go to horror movies to feel fear, they go to release it. That philosophy in practice goes a long way in underscoring the true strength of Scream, and why he and Williamson had to redefine the genre. It's the golden rule. If the horror genre is defined by the relationship between movie and audience, then that definition needs to reflect the reason the audience shows up in the first place. The idea that folks go to the movies to feel fear isn't a misnomer per se, but it is a byproduct of a larger mechanism. For Williamson, Craven, and Prescott, the ability to feel fear is intrinsic to the act of releasing it. They're not mutually exclusive outcomes, one's just governed by the other. It's to this end that Scream is most successful, and it's a momentous accomplishment for a movie and creative team whose legacy with regard to their own output is success in the broad. As always, there are a million things I wanted to touch on but didn't get to. I think I mentioned Dewey like twice in the script. I think he's fun. David Arquette's surreal and awkward energy in real life is a great fit for a goofy on-screen deputy. The movie obviously isn't without its humor. It's Matthew Lillard as Stu that most folks have their eye on, but I think Skeet Ulrich provides a lot of it too. I like his yikes face when he gets off Sidney in the bedroom, and I love his De Niro when Sidney appears during the climax and he goes, "What?" I could levy some critiques at the movie, sure. There's no way that Ghostface should be able to follow Sidney and Tatum through a grocery store. Neil Prescott is literally a MacGuffin, and while Scream isn't the scariest movie in the world, it isn't trying to be. All of this feels superfluous in context. I really didn't watch horror movies before deciding to take a chance on Scream. I didn't want to go to the movies to be scared. I didn't understand how other people could go to the movies and pay their hard-earned money to sit there and be terrified while the movie fucks with them on purpose. I couldn't even walk through the video store because the poster to Mortal Kombat Annihilation freaked me out in 1997. I was a scared kid. Scream's greatest achievement isn't in its metatextual autopsy or its subsequent revival of a dead genre. It doesn't lie in the legacy of its director or his accomplishments. It doesn't lie in the genre-fueled subterfuge of its screenwriter. Scream's greatest achievement is itself, as a whole, as a movie. Horror movies are distinct in that they're mostly a conversation between the author and their audience, and in order to thrive, they have to be. There's an implicit level of trust given by genre fans to works that attract them by default, and this is especially true for horror. It takes a lot to ask folks to show up to your movie with the expectation that you're going to try and terrify them, so you establish a set of rules to govern their expectations throughout a guided experience. What Craven and Williamson and that 12-year-old kid understood is that it isn't any particular rulebook that matters, it's the act of establishing one that does. Why is Scream my favorite scary movie? Because it didn't tell me to feel fear, it told me to release it. Hi everybody, an extra big thank you for watching this video because tomorrow is Thanksgiving, which means I missed my Halloween deadline by a month. Yeah, this video definitely took longer to break than the other videos did. I think I just had a lot of catching up to do before I could really do justice to Scream, especially because I like it so much. I really didn't make any negative points in this video, I don't think. But yeah, I'm pretty excited by how this one came out. I'm not sure if it's better or worse than Scooby-Doo yet, but that's where you come in. So you can leave me a comment underneath. You can let me know, was it good? Was it bad? Were there things I missed or messed up? Yeah, and I'm supposed to say like my video and subscribe to my channel. And this is my last video as a year-old man because my birthday is on Sunday. So this video is sponsored by my Cash App if you're feeling generous. Okay, have a good day. Take it easy. Bye.